Alarms you
Why
can't
purity
argue
saves reactors. Open the watertight door and it's hot, close and humming. Primary loop on the board, boron numbers scribbled in grease pencil, and a small white card with two figures circled, 7.2 and 7.4. Those aren't decorations. That's the pH window, corrected to what 300 degrees Celsius does to water's chemistry. Live inside it, and the metals keep their temper. Drift outside, and the plant starts writing IOUs you'll pay in dose, cracks, and downtime. Li-7 is the quiet hand on that dial. You dissolve it as lithium hydroxide, and it buffers the coolant against the acids born when radiolyses chews on water and when corrosion throws its tantrums. At room temperature, neutral is pH 7. At reactor temperature, neutral slides lower, and the right 7 on a handheld meter isn't the right 7 in the core. That's why the card S there. It's memory, not math. Now the part the periodic table doesn't warn you about. Natural lithium brings two characters to the party. Li-7, which barely notices neutrons, and Li-6, which loves them. When Li-6 grabs a neutron, it splits. Alpha particle here, tritium there. You don't feel that reaction like a kick. You feel it as a slow, relentless drift. Tritium builds where you'd rather it didn't. Helium finds its way into microstructures and pushes on grain boundaries. And the neutron that could have done useful work goes missing. Parasitic absorption is a polite phrase for a real cost. In a submarine reactor, margin lives in small places. Boron already soaks up neutrons to shape reactivity across the cycle. Fuel sees a planned burn-up curve. Control rods dance their careful dance. None of that expects a creeping thief in the coolant. So the spec pushes Li-7 purity hard. Think 99.9% and up, so that every gram you add to hold pH doesn't rent space to Li-6 habits. Miss that, even by the paperclip's worth, that crews joke about, and you're paying interest on debt you didn't mean to take. Watch how it shows up. The EOOW calls for a small LiOH addition after a power change, routine. You watch the calculated pH track slide back into the box. Good. But an hour later, the tritium monitor ticks a little higher than your mental model says it should. Not an alarm, not yet. Just enough to earn a look. You log it, you watch it, and you tell yourself the assay will clear the lot tomorrow, if the lab can squeeze you in. Here's the harder story hiding under the chart tape. pH isn't just a corrosion guardrail. It decides which oxides form, where they form, and how stable they are. Nickel alloys in steam generators, stainless in piping, fuel cladding, each has a comfort zone. Stay buffered, and the crud that does form tends to be tight, adherent, predictable. Drift and you get flake, spall, transport, spall heads to hot places. It rides the flow into the core, plates out where flux is highest, and starts shadowing neutrons. Now you've got a two-front war. Chemistry is tilting materials, and transporting crud is tilting physics. Engineers have tricks. Zinc injection can tweak oxide structure. Hydrogen control can manage radiolysis products. You can tune boron curves and manipulate letdown cleanup. But all those moves assume the foundation buffer, LiOH from Li-7, isn't sneaking in an extra neutron handbrake and a tritium tap. If it is, your fixes fight each other. Solve pH and raise dose. Lower dose and invite stress corrosion somewhere else. On a pier with time and lab slips, you can sort cause from effect. At depth on patrol, you can't. Get this, hydrogen pickup isn't just a word on a slide. Cladding sees hydrogen as a guest that overstays. Too much, and it changes how the metal deforms under stress. Tritium makes monitoring jumpy not because it's catastrophic, but because it turns your confidence into a question. Confidence runs a boat. If the EOOW believes the models, he'll stretch a little to protect the mission. If the models keep losing to the meters, he'll tighten. But there was one problem, the captain says in a debrief, keeping his voice flat so it doesn't sound like anger. We didn't know the number that mattered when we sailed. Sure, labs aren't villains, they're bottlenecks. True isotope assays, TIMS, MC-ICP-MS, aren't finger-stick tests. They're precision work with cues, calibrations, and lately, export control paperwork on replacement parts. A naval drum gets in line behind a commercial run with penalties. The calendar makes chemistry a gamble. Assay delays twist procedures. You write a temporary deviation that lets you blend. You promise to keep pH in the slot and watch tritium like a hawk. You insert extra samples into a schedule already tight with maintenance. It feels like diligence. It is diligence. It's also turning certainty into statistics. Each blend is a new roll of the dice on an isotope fraction you can't measure at sea. Meanwhile, the XO is thinking ahead of the plant. What does a creeping neutron penalty mean for Rodworth later in the patrol? What does a slightly higher dose rate mean for watch rotations and cumulative totals? Do we bank power early to protect materials margins? Or do we hold the line and spend chemistry to save schedule? None of these questions should hinge on whether a certificate used typical, where it should have said measured. Here's the part that keeps chiefs awake. A submarine reactor runs fine until it doesn't. The alarms you heard in the cold open weren't theatrics. If pH control slips while tritium creep says your Li6 fraction is higher than planned, you start stacking small conservatisms. One day it's a quiet derate to give crud a chance to settle. Another day it's a surprise scram, because a set point you never used to nudge is now living on a hair trigger. That's not fear. That's a system telling you it wants the purity it was designed around. So yes, this is chemistry. It's also command. The smallest speck on a drum decides whether captain writes press or surface. And on boats where minutes matter, that gram isn't pedantry. It's the difference between riding the numbers and trusting them. The paper cuts that bleed a fleet. Walk into the QA office and you'll see it. A stack of certificates of analysis, each one neat, precise, and just slippery enough to miss the point. The top line reads, lithium hydroxide monohydrate, 99.99%. Good. The line you need 2 pages down says, Li7 assay, typical 99, 599, 9%. Typical is a lullaby. Boats don't sail on lullabies. Here, where bureaucratic gravity does its work. A vendor splits a large production lot into smaller shipments to match delivery windows. Each daughter lot inherits the mother's certificate, but the isotope fraction shifts when moisture content drifts or when a drum gets topped off from a neighboring tote to standardize weights. Nobody lied. Nobody checked either. The paper stays clean. The chemistry doesn't. Then there's the harmonized code trick. A freight forwarder flips the HS code to shave a tariff point or bypass a slower inspection lane. On the dock, a drum that left port as nuclear-grade Li7 hydroxide shows up as industrial lithium hydroxide tech. You fix the customs entry, sure. What you can't fix is the broken chain of custody on the isotope assay. The sample jar that proved the batch was on spec is now divorced from the drum in your hand by a keystroke. Assays aren't instant. True isotope ratios need TIMS or MC-ICP-MS, machines that live behind locked doors, with calibration logs that read like pilot checklists. Those labs book weeks out, and they carry commercial penalties for delays. A naval rush job slides into a queue behind a pharmaceutical run that has a clause with zeros you don't compete with. So the shore chemist writes a temporary deviation. Use blend plan, behold pH tight. Watch tritium daily. Promise to true up when the numbers land. That promise keeps the patrol on schedule. It also spends certainty like cash. The Government Accountability Office warned about this in 2013 without naming names. No federal entity has taken stewardship responsibility for assessing and managing risks to the lithium-7 supply. In plain language, nobody is on the hook to make sure what the Navy needs arrives, verified, when the Navy needs it. That gap breeds small behaviors that grow teeth. Vendors use assay ranges instead of absolutes. Buyers accept meets lithium content because contracts reward weight, not enrichment. Insurance riders get rewritten to exclude isotopic guarantees, quietly, on page 7, so a claim dies before it's born. Watch the blend room on a busy day. 2 borderline drums, 1 strong drum, a spreadsheet that sings assurance. The math works, but every blend creates a new entity with a history the certificate can't quite capture. You've taken 3 questions and fused them into one bigger question with nicer formatting. Meanwhile, the plant at sea sees a pH that looks right and a tritium drift that doesn't. The EOOW tightens procedures. The captain starts reading logs with a finger on the set points. Paper can slow a fleet in other ways too. Export controls tightened on precision assay gear. A replacement filament for a mass spec gets flagged for review because the vendor sits on the wrong side of a sanction tree. The part sits in a bonded warehouse while a patrol plan gets rewritten ashore. The result looks like maintenance in the weekly brief. It feels like a leash in the control room. Here's a micro story that never makes the press release. A QA chemist, Reyes, gets an email at 214. The lab slot opened. Bring the sample now. She drives with a cooler on the passenger seat because rules are rules, checks the chain of custody seals twice at red lights, and hands the vial across a threshold where the clock stops making sense. The analyst runs the instrument through midnight. The printout in the morning has a number with 2 decimals to the right of 99.9. Reyes knows what it means before anyone says it. Green light by a hair. She signs. She also circles the hair and sends a note. Stop accepting typical. Ask for measured. Meanwhile, a consortium shows up with a smile and a white paper on harmonized tolerances. The pitch sounds reasonable. Align military specs with broader industry ranges, reduce friction, boost availability. The slide that doesn't get read aloud is the cost column labeled Neutron Penalty Risk Transferred to Operator. Transferred as in you. The operator at sea, with alarms. Certificates list lithium content, not Li-7 enrichment, because the template was written for grease plants and battery cathodes. Fixing that template means rewriting procurement habits, retraining inspectors, and telling suppliers that payment rides on a number they don't like to measure. That takes leverage. Leverage shows up when patrols get delayed and someone important asks why a superpower is waiting on a decimal. Blending hides sins. It also hides accountability. A mislabeled drum that slips through becomes part of 3 other drums by Friday. 6 months later, a reactor derates on a pattern that looks like weather until you line up the paperwork and see the family tree. By then, the trader is gone, the forwarder changed software, and the insurance rider points to clause 12. None of this looks like sabotage. That's the point. It's the sum of footnotes, Q slips, tariff flips, and certificates written for the wrong audience. It bleeds time, certainty, and margin. On a submarine, that's readiness. On a bad night in blue water, that's the difference between pressing and surfacing. The procedural leak, how it was done. If you're looking for a smoking gun, you won't find one. You'll find forms, and each form, standing alone, looks harmless. Together, they drain readiness like a pinhole in a ballast tank. Start at the start. Brine. Lithium comes out of salt flats and hard rock with a passport-stamped commodity. From there it moves to refiners who chase moisture, carbonate and metals, not isotopes. Enrichment sits a layer deeper, behind doors that don't host plant tour. That's where Li-7 is separated from Li-6, by chemical exchange columns, by vendor-guarded tweaks, by people who learn the hard way which contactor doesn't burp at shift change. Then packagers blend to target moisture, bag or drum the hydroxide, and hand it to logistics. Naval depots stand at the far end of this chain, squinting at certificates and hoping the words on the page map to neutrons in the core. Here's where plausible deniability earns its pension. A refiner sells to an isotopic partner, but that partner's contract allows subcontracting for surge capacity. The subcontractor meets every visible chemical spec, but their cut on Li-7 runs hot and cold because their columns were tuned for wider tolerances. The shipping label lists lithium hydroxide content, moisture, and trace metals, exactly what most customers demand. It does not list Li-7 enrichment because the template never asked for it. No law broken, no red flag tripped. The only place the number lives is in a separate assay report tied to a batch ID until the batch ID drifts. Watch a simple move break that tie. On a Friday rush, a warehouseman tops off a drum to hit a uniform net weight because the contract pays per drum. He pulls from a neighbor tote with the same product code. The internal lot number updates in the enterprise system. The paper cert doesn't. It's not malice. It's end-of-week muscle memory. By Monday, the blended drum carries a mother certificate for a daughter mixture. The Li-7 fraction is now an average of unknowns, and the family tree just lost a branch. Now drop the freight forwarder into the story. A customer service rep picks the harmonized tariff code that clears customs fastest. The code treats lithium salts as one category. Isotopes aren't part of the schedule. On arrival, the Naval Depot's intake clerk sees a mismatch between the purchase order's nuclear grade note and the bill of lading's technical grade. He fixes the entry, but the change severs the digital link to the offshore lab that ran the isotope assay. The lab's PDF sits in an inbox attached to an old reference number. The drum now exists as a legal fact without the scientific fact that mattered. Insurance used to backstop this. Then underwriters got smart. Policies started carving out isotopic composition guarantees from coverage quietly on the third page of riders written in comfortable fonts. If a batch tests off spec for LI-7, the claim stalls. The supplier points to the contract's definition of quality. The contract points to the certificate's typical range. The insurer points to the rider. Everyone points somewhere. The drum sits. Meanwhile, assay capacity is thin. Precision isotope ratios need TIMS or MCIMS with clean rooms, tuned standards, and parts that don't ship quickly when export controls get twitchy. A filament order lands on a list that requires license review because a component vendor changed domicile last quarter. The mass spec goes dark for want of a wire the thickness of a hair. The naval queue backs up. A patrol window narrows. Someone drafts a temporary deviation to blend two borderline drums into a pass. It keeps the schedule. It also spreads the uncertainty like paint. Here's a micro story that shows how fast identity can fracture. A freight forwarder, new to the account, sees lithium hydroxide monohydrate and switches the HS code to the one his software flags as low risk. He's shaving 2 days and a fee for his client. He doesn't know the receiving command treats that code as a red light for isotope traceability. The shipment gets routed through a different inland port. The depot's intake SOP for nuclear-grade lots never triggers. By the time anyone notices, the sample chain is broken. The assay vial that left the plant and the drum that hit the pier can't be proven siblings. What nobody knew at the time, insurers weren't the only ones rewriting fine print. Some suppliers started sliding "no isotopic warranty implied" into back pages of master service agreements. It read like boilerplate until a claim hit. Then it read like a wall. And over all of it hangs the shadow of domestic restart politics. Legacy, COLEX's mercury footprint turned "let's build columns here" into a hearing with photos no senator wants near a re-election ad. Even if new, mercury-free methods promise cleaner cuts, the ghost of Oak Ridge Slow's signatures. That political drag becomes market leverage abroad. If you can't restart at home and you can't verify fast, you accept what you're given, blends, ranges, typicals, and you write procedures to survive your own paperwork. Nobody sabotaged a valve. Nobody tampered with an alarm. They didn't need to. The leak runs through procurement fields, insurance riders, tariff codes, and lab queues. It looks like administration. It behaves like a choke. And when geopolitics leans on sanctions and export controls, the narrow parts snap first, not where the cameras are, but where the filaments and certificates live. Sanctions, tariffs, and the boomerang. While the procedural leak spread through forms and freight codes, geopolitics walked in and kicked the legs out from under the table. Sanctions, tariffs, export controls, tools meant to squeeze rivals, started squeezing the narrowest part of our own line first. GAO's 2013 warning sits in the background like a metronome. Zero domestic LI-7 production, no federal steward, dependence on foreign supply with thin visibility. Add friction to that system, and the weak links fail where you live. Here's how it felt on the ground. A routine order for ion exchange membranes, the kind that live inside isotope columns, hit a new tariff classification. The vendor shrugged. "We can still ship, but lead times just doubled." A follow-up note added a sting. "We're prioritizing our largest customers." Translation: battery plants with tonnage needs, not isotope lines with a boutique spec. At the same time, a small company that made specialty resins for lithium cleanup got caught in a sanctions splash because its parent had a joint venture in the wrong postal code. No one targeted LI-7. LI-7 got hit anyway. Export controls bit where you least expect them. Precision assay equipment, TIMS filaments, MC-IMS cones, moved onto lists that require end-use checks. Perfectly reasonable on paper. In practice, a naval lab's reorder bounced between desks for weeks because a subcomponent supplier had shifted ownership to a foreign fund the year before. The instruments sat idle. Shore chemists shuffled samples and rewrote test plans by headlamp glow. A patrol window crept closer. Somebody suggested borrowing time at an allied lab. Good idea, until customs decided the sample vials themselves needed a declaration dance. Resin prices went up. Shipping premiums went up. A critical valve for a brine pre-treatment skid got flagged under blanket advanced manufacturing review because it used a new ceramic seat. The supplier swore it was dual use. The form didn't have a box for swearing. Weeks bled away. Program managers started drawing arrows on whiteboards from policy objective to unintended bottleneck. The arrows all ended at the same place, readiness. Utilities felt it too. A negotiator at an allied nuclear plant sat across from a defense liaison and shuffled a single sheet of paper she didn't want to hand over. It was a refueling schedule. If we slide zinc injections and stretch a cleanup interval, we can free this much Li-7-based LiOH for 2 quarters, she said. But we'll eat dose upticks and a tighter corrosion watch. She wasn't bargaining, she was triaging. Grid reliability on one side, submarine patrols on the other. She signed a letter of intent and didn't sleep that night. Lead times quietly doubled. Naval programs, staring at peer calendars, began cannibalizing civil stockpiles through back-channel agreements. The optics had to look like routine interagency coordination. The reality was a shell game. A utility delayed a pH adjustment plan and rewrote its ALARA notes. The Navy got drums with the right to say this time. Everyone paid in inspection hours and political capital. Meanwhile, assay gear export controls created a second-order problem nobody budgeted for. Spare parts pipelines became single-threaded. A shipment of certified standards, a tiny box that teaches your instrument what 99.95% actually means, got stuck because the carrier changed their list of secure lanes. The lab chief called the depot. We can run relative numbers, but without fresh standards, I won't certify absolute Li-7 for deployment. The room went quiet. Relative confidence doesn't launch boats. In a conference room with coffee gone cold, a classified memo slid across a table. Proposal: an emergency purity holiday for deployments temporarily relax the greater or equal to 99.9% Li-7 spec if pH control and dose remain within guardrails. The arguments were familiar. Missions don't wait. Models can bound the neutron penalty. We can monitor tritium daily. The counter-arguments were older. Metallurgy doesn't negotiate. Tritium permeation isn't linear with comfort. A paper holiday on physics becomes a bill you pay in embrittlement, crud transport, and inspection debt. One captain put it in plain words. You can waive a signature. You can't waive a cross-section. He wasn't being pious. He was thinking about a fatigue-prone weld near a safe end that didn't need an extra nudge from hydrogen pickup this cycle. He was thinking about rod worth margins that look fine on slide 3 and tight on day 72. Trade friction also sharpened the asymmetry abroad. The region holding most high purity capacity watched us fumble and adjusted knobs we couldn't see. A maintenance slip at one plant coincided, unhelpfully, with a spike in global shipping costs. Contract clauses invoked force majeure with a smile. Deliveries slid right. Prices edged up, not enough to trigger headlines, just enough to make bad options look bearable. From the deck plates, none of this wore a villain's face. It wore stamps, emails, and coy phone calls about regulatory updates. It looked like good intentions hardened into controls that didn't know what they were controlling. And every control, nudged without a system steward, pushed Li-7 from scarce to precarious. The Purity Holiday memo didn't die. It went into a folder titled Contingencies, a word that tastes safe until you live it. In metallurgy shops, engineers circled it with red pens and notes. Cost here, crack there, dose everywhere. They weren't being precious. They were counting the boomerang's arc. What started as policy to signal strength ended up signaling something else, to our own crews. If the smallest speck on a drum can be traded for a schedule, what else bends? That question hangs. Metallurgy fights louder than any alarm. Metallurgists hate holidays on physics.